In the early 1990s, rumors of a mysterious wreck off the coast of New Jersey led a group of daring American divers to an extraordinary discovery. The massive submarine bore no identifying marks and lay 230 feet beneath the waves in crushing depths where oxygen turns toxic and nitrogen plays dangerous tricks on the mind. Driven by obsession, divers pushed deeper into the silt-covered wreck. The father and son team ventured too far inside the twisted corridors. Trapped in the depths, they would make a desperate ascent that neither would survive. But among their discoveries was a knife engraved with the name Horenburg. This revealed the submarine's German origins and deepened the mystery. No wartime records mentioned a U-boat operating in these waters. The discovery challenged everything historians knew about submarine warfare off America's coast. According to official documents, every German U-boat lost in the Atlantic had been carefully accounted for. Each had its own story, its own final resting place. But for half a century, this one had kept its secrets. In the summer of 1991, former wreck diver Bill Nagel was drinking a beer in a rundown bar in Brielle, New Jersey, when a drunken fisherman slumped onto the stool next to him. Slurring his words, the man claimed he discovered something incredible on the ocean floor. Nagel didn't trust him, but against his better judgment, he agreed to meet the man the next morning on the pier by his boat. At dawn, the fisherman showed up looking nervous. He handed Nagel a torn scrap of paper with a set of coordinates scrawled on it. He refused to explain further. That piece of paper would pull Nagel and fellow wreck divers John Chatterton and Richie Kohler into a 6-year quest. It would lead to fatalities, betrayal, and the collapse of their marriages. The first dive revealed a massive submarine buried in the silt. The shape of its hull suggested it was from World War II, but they needed confirmation. Nagel and his team pored over diagrams of wartime ships and suspected it was German. To prove it, they'd have to enter its crumbling corridors, where sharp metal and debris made every move a gamble. On September 29, 1991, they found their proof: an intact crockery bowl stamped with an eagle, swastika, and the date 1942. This was a German U-boat. But which one? Almost all of the 757 U-boats sunk during the war were accounted for. This wreck wasn't on any list. The wreck's location was just 60 miles off the coast of New Jersey. That fact alone was staggering. Few U-boats had ventured so close to American shores, and there was no record of one being lost in this area. The Navy and German archives were silent. Whatever this submarine was doing here was buried under layers of secrecy. The wreck lay 230 feet down, deeper than recreational divers usually went. The submarine's hull bore the scars of a massive explosion. Thus, the inside was a maze of collapsed passageways, twisted steel, and human bones. Every dive risked disaster. On one of the first dives, a diver became exhausted and disoriented, and he was swept away by an underwater current. It would take over 6 months for his body to appear. John Chatterton was gambling with lives. The deeper they went, the higher the cost. Abandoning the mission seemed like the sensible thing to do, but this dive site had become an obsession for Chatterton. On November 6, 1991, divers recovered a stainless steel dinner knife from the port side of the non-commissioned officer's quarters. Its wooden handle bore a single carved name: Horenburg. It was the first concrete clue. But a name alone wasn't enough. There were likely dozens of sailors with the same surname. The divers needed more. On another diving expedition, the crew was joined by Chris Rouse Sr. and his son, Chris Rouse Jr., also called Chrissy, experienced divers who had heard about the wreck and were determined to push deeper to uncover the truth. Diving in dozens of wrecks had made them daring. They descended into the submarine's wreckage to explore its cramped interior. Suddenly, Chris Jr. became trapped in a confined passageway. It took too long for them to solve the problem and free Chris Jr. As they began their ascent, their prolonged time at depth required strict decompression stops to avoid the bends. But they ran out of breathing gas before completing the stops. Desperate and facing drowning above the wreck, father and son shared air, struggling to reach safety. Both suffered severe decompression sickness. Airlifted to a hyperbaric chamber, they succumbed shortly after. The tragedy shook the diving community. But the Rouses had found something before meeting their fate. They had recovered a schematic drawing of the submarine's trim and ballast systems, printed on aluminum and found inside the captain's quarters. The diagram confirmed that the submarine was a Type 9C U-boat, constructed at the Deschamont facility in Bremen. This was not entirely surprising, as the Type 9C was a U-boat designed specifically for long patrols. Piece by piece, the mystery was coming together. Armed with the name Horenburg and the new details about the U-boat's type, Nagel pursued the truth with renewed obsession. He traveled to Germany and the Deutsches U-Boat Museum, home to the largest collection of U-boat records and artifacts. There, he found the name he was looking for, Martin Horenburg. Horenburg was the only man with that surname ever registered in the U-boat service. It was definitive. He had served aboard a Type 9C U-boat, to be precise, U-869. But there was a problem. U-869 had been reported sunk off Gibraltar, far from the American coastline. It had never been assigned to operate near the United States. The mystery hadn't been solved. It had deepened. The quest that began in 1991 and claimed the lives of 3 men finally ended on August 31st, 1997, lasting longer than World War II itself. On that day, divers working the wreck managed to force their way through a collapsed fuel tank into the engine room. There, they found a wooden box marked with a plastic tag. Extracting the box through the small gap between the hull and the collapsed fuel tank was a grueling effort. Encrusted with goo, seaweed, and decades of decay, the tag was barely legible. But after careful cleaning, they had confirmation. This was U-869, lost for over 50 years. But bigger questions remained. Why was there an official report stating that U-869 had been sunk off North Africa? What mission brought it to American waters? And what had happened to its crew? The divers, now part historians, began piecing together the story of U-869. The answers they uncovered would reveal a forgotten chapter of World War II. U-869's official log records its departure for its first patrol on November 23, 1944. After 11 months of grueling training, the crew was finally ready for combat. 26-year-old Captain Helmut Neuerberg commanded the submarine, embarking on his first mission as a U-boat commander. On December 8, 1944, U-869 left Norway, heading for the Atlantic. 3 weeks later, U-boat command transmitted Neuerberg's operational orders. They were anything but routine. The mission was beyond perilous. Neuerberg was ordered to sail to New York Harbor. Whether his objective was to spy on U.S. operations or target American ships remains unclear. But by late 1944, operating so close to a major Allied stronghold was almost a capital sentence. Protocol required Neuerberg to acknowledge receipt of the orders. Inside the submarine, radio operator Martin Horenburg sent the acknowledgement. However, whether due to an equipment malfunction or signal interference, the transmission never reached its destination. Convinced something was wrong, U-boat command issued new orders. U-869 was to abandon its mission and head for Gibraltar, expected to arrive by January 19, 1945. Neuerberg never acknowledged these orders either. While U-boat command and U-869 failed to establish contact, Allied codebreakers intercepted every message. By early 1945, they were tracking the submarine, but couldn't determine if it was near Gibraltar or patrolling off New York Harbor. U-869 was never heard from again. Families of the crew received letters from the Kriegsmarine stating the submarine, low on fuel, had been lost near Gibraltar. This account relied on Neuerberg's last known orders and events from February 28, 1945. On that day, the American destroyer escort USS Fowler and the French submarine chaser L'Indiscret launched a depth charge attack on a submerged contact near Rabat. They reported a sinking, though little evidence supported the claim. Initially, U.S. naval intelligence rated the attack as G, no damage. However, post-war investigators upgraded it to B, probably sunk, and this erroneous conclusion entered the historical record. For decades, it was assumed that U-869 had been destroyed near Gibraltar. The real fate of U-869 was buried under layers of confusion, miscommunication, and wartime chaos. The truth is, U-869 and her crew made it to their patrol area near the New York Harbor before meeting their fate. How exactly the submarine was sunk remains an enduring mystery. The men who found the wreck, including divers John Chatterton and Richie Kohler, believed U-869 was a victim of her own torpedo. Their theory hinged on circle-running torpedoes, a known flaw in late-war torpedo designs. These torpedoes had acoustic-seeking capabilities to track engine sounds. If a torpedo missed its target, it could inadvertently lock onto the sound of its own submarine's propellers and return to strike. Chatterton and Kohler suggested this might have been the case with U-869, based on the evidence they found, or more accurately, the lack of evidence supporting any other cause. They argued there were no records of naval activity near the area at the time of U-869 sinking, ruling out a deliberate attack. Furthermore, the damage to the submarine's hull appeared to be external, ruling out an internal explosion. Historical precedent supported their claim. At least 2 other German U-boats, U-972 in 1943 and U-877 in 1944, were believed to have been lost to their own circle-running torpedoes. Even the U.S. submarine fleet experienced similar tragedies, as with the losses of USS Tang and USS Tullabee. However, not everyone agreed with the divers. Gary Gentile, a noted wreck diver, researcher, and author, strongly contested Chatterton and Kohler's theory. Gentile pointed to attack logs and eyewitness accounts from the crews of 2 U.S. destroyer escorts, the Howard D. Crow and the Coiner. According to these records, the Crow launched a hedgehog attack, an anti-submarine weapon that fired a pattern of explosive projectiles which damaged U-869. The Coiner then followed up with depth charges that further crippled the submarine. Adding to the controversy is the United States Coast Guard's evaluation. Their official report dismissed the circle-running torpedo theory and credited the sinking of U-869 to the 2 destroyer escorts. Supporting the conclusion were eyewitness accounts, including that of Marlin Berkey, who was aboard a destroyer in New York Harbor after the war. Berkey claimed their sonar detected a submarine, which was destroyed with depth charges. Oil and debris reportedly rose to the surface, and the destroyer returned to port, flying a broom upside down, a naval symbol of a clean sweep victory. Physical evidence from the wreck further complicated the story. The damage to U-869 included 2 distinct holes in the hull, which some argued were more consistent with an attack involving multiple explosions than with a single detonation from a circle-running torpedo. Despite this, John Chatterton remained firm in his belief. Writing in Wreck Diving magazine, he suggested a hybrid theory. U-869 may have been struck by her own torpedo, leaving her crippled and vulnerable. The destroyer escorts could then have attacked the already damaged submarine, mistaking it for an active threat. Official records now list U-869's destruction on February 11, 1945, attributing the sinking to Howard D. Crow and Coiner. Yet the lack of absolute clarity in the evidence leaves room for speculation, and the debate among historians, divers, and researchers continues.